Welcome, Wapham crew, guys, gals, ghouls, friends, fiends, foe. Cue your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners, and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. It is Sunday, May 5th, Monday, May 6th for those of you across the pond and beyond. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, and happy Cinco de Mayo. Hope you guys had a good day, had some cervezas and some yummy old Mexican food. I didn't have, well, actually, yeah, I had two chimichangas, one beef and one chicken. It's pretty good. So I'm your host, TessaTNT. We're broadcasting live from the Mile High Clubhouse tonight. If you are listening live right now, you may be listening to us on KPNL Radio, which you can find at KPNL Radio at kpnl-db.com, as well as eTalk Radio, which you can find at etalk.tv/radio, as well as StreamYard under We Are Paradox Media. And basically, you can come and watch us on YouTube under We Are Paradox Media, Facebook under We Are Paradox Media, as well as Twitch. If you like to listen to us in your free time, whether you're working it or working out, just tune in anywhere you listen to your podcasts, and that's where you'll find us. So I'm hoping to get this internet issue fixed. There's a little delay, a little lag here, but hopefully it's not too bad. Hopefully you guys don't mind too much. I'm just going to check and make sure my sound is working. Yep, everything looks good. So we're going to continue reading this book by Sue Grafton, K is for Killer. It's been a pretty good book so far. I'm just really excited to get into The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That's going to be a really good one. I want to start reading it, but we'll finish this one first before we move on to that one. I checked it out from the Durango Library, and I'm kind of thinking about just buying the series just so I could have it for myself. But let's go for this. K is for Killer by Sue Grafton, Chapter 10. When I got to the airport, I left the VW in long-term parking and hiked back to the terminal. Like most public buildings in Santa Teresa, the airport is vaguely Spanish in appearance. 1.5 stories of white stucco with red tile roof, arches, and a curving stairway up the side. Inside the terminal, there are only 5 departure gates, with a tiny newsstand on the first floor and a modest coffee shop on the second. At the United counter, I picked up my ticket and gave my name to the agent in case a seat opened up on an earlier plane. No such luck. I found a seat nearby, propped my head on my fist, and snoozed like a vagrant until my flight was called. In the time I waited, I could have driven to San Francisco. The plane was a little putt-putt with 15 seats, 10 of which were occupied. I turned my attention to the glossy airline magazine tucked in the seat pouch in front of me. This was my complimentary copy, it said so right on the front. The term complimentary meaning way too boring to spend real money on. While the engines were being revved up with all the high whine of racing mopeds, the flight attendant recited last rites. We couldn't hear a word she was saying, but the way her mouth was moving, we got the general idea. We took off with the aircraft, bucking and shuddering, the flight smoothing out abruptly as we reached altitude. The attendant made her way down the aisle with a tray dispensing clear plastic cups full of orange juice or Coca-Cola, and child-proof packets of choose one pretzels or peanuts. The airlines, extremely cunning at trimming costs these days, have now reduced the serving size of these peanuts to approximately 1 tablespoon per person. I broke each of mine in half, eating one piece at a time to prolong the experience. As we droned up the coast through the night-blackened sky, communities below us appeared as a series of patchy, disconnected lights. At that altitude, the towns looked like isolated colonies on an alien planet with dark stretches between what, by day, would be mountains. I was disoriented by the landscape. I tried to pick out Santa Maria, Paso Robles, and King City, but I had no clear sense of size or distance. I could see the 101, but the highway looked eerie and unfamiliar at that remove. We reached San Francisco in a little under an hour and a half. Coming in, I could see streetlights undulate across the hills, tracing the terrain like a contour map. We touched down at the commuter terminal, so remote that a progression of ground agents had to be stationed along the tarmac to point us to civilization. We went into the building, up the back stairs like immigration deportees, and finally emerged into a familiar corridor. I stopped off at a newsstand and bought myself a decent city map, then found the rental car counter, where I filled out all the paperwork. By 11:05, I was on the 101, heading north toward the city. The night was clear and cold, the lights of Oakland and Alameda visible to my right across the bay. Traffic moved swiftly, and the city began to take shape around me like a neon confection. Half a mile past Market Street, at Golden Gate Avenue, the 101 dwindled down to a surface road. I drove the short half block to Van Ness and turned left, eventually taking another left onto Lombard. Coffee shops and motels of every size and description lined both sides of the 4-lane thoroughfare. Not wanting to devote unnecessary energy to the project, I checked into the Del Rey Motel at the first vacant sign. I would only be there one night. All I needed was a room clean enough that I wouldn't be forced to wear shoes at all times. I asked for accommodations away from the traffic noise and was directed to 343 at the back. The Del Rey was one of those motels where the management assumes you're going to steal everything in sight. All the coat hangers were designed so the hooks couldn't be removed from the hanging rod. There was a notice on the television warning that removal of the cord and any movement of the set would automatically sound an alarm beyond guest control. The clock radio was bolted to the bed table. This was an establishment fully prepared to outfox thieves and scam artists. I put an ear to the wall, wondering who might be lurking in the room next to mine. That's kind of creepy. What the heck? I could hear snores rattle against the quiet. That was going to be restful later when I tried to sleep myself. I sat down on the edge of the bed and called the office, leaving my telephone number for Ida Root. While I was at it, I dialed my own answering machine using the remote code to check for messages. None. My winsome long-distance message had netted me no response, which meant I'd have to go calling at some point. It was nearly midnight by now, and I could feel energy seeping out through my pores. Since I'd given up on my day life to conduct my business by night, I'd noticed it was getting harder to predict the plunges into exhaustion. I longed to fling myself backwards on the bed and fall asleep in my clothes. I roused myself before the notion became too seductive. In the bathroom, a printed notice warned of lingering drought conditions and begged motel guests to use as little water as possible. I took a quick, guilt-ridden shower, then dried myself on a towel as rough as a sidewalk. I set my duffel on the bed and pulled out clean underwear and pantyhose. Then I hauled out the wonder garment, my black all-purpose dress. Not that long ago, this article had been afester with ditch water, smelling of mildew and assorted swamp creatures. I'd sent it to get cleaned several times in the intervening months, and by now it was as good as new, unless you sniffed really, really close. The fabric represented the apex of recent scientific achievement, lightweight, wrinkle-defying, quick-drying, and indestructible. Several of my acquaintances rued this later quality, begging me to dump the dress and add another to my wardrobe. I couldn't see the point. With its long sleeves and tucked front, the all-purpose dress was perfect, well, adequate, for all occasions. I gave it a shake and undid the zipper, managing to step into the dress and my black flats simultaneously. No one would mistake me for a fashion plate, but at least I could pass myself as a grown-up. According to the map and the address I'd given, Joseph Ayers was living in Pacific Heights. I laid the map on the car seat and left an interior light so I could see where I was going. I took a left on Vivasadero and headed toward Sacramento Street. Once in the vicinity, I cruised the area. Even at this hour, the Ayers residence wasn't hard to spot. The house was ablaze with lights, and the steady stream of guests, both arriving and departing, were taking advantage of the valet. Is that valet? Why is there an R in there? I never noticed it was spelled like that before. Parking out in front, I turned my car over to one of the young men in black dress pants and white tuxedo shirts. There was a Mercedes ahead of me and a Jaguar pulling up behind. The front gate was open, and late arrivals were being steered around the side of the house toward the garden and back. Entrance to the party was being monitored by a man in a tuxedo, who viewed my outfit with visible concern. "Good evening. May I see your invitation?" "I'm not here for the party. I have a personal appointment with Mr. Ayers." His look said that this seemed doubtful. However, he was being paid to smile, and he gave me the minimum wages worth. "Ring the front doorbell. One of the maids will let you in." The house was surrounded by a narrow band of yard, generous by San Francisco standards, where houses were usually constructed smack up against each other. A high boxwood hedge had been planted just inside the wrought iron fence to maximize privacy. I moved up the brick walk. The grass on either side was tender green and recently mowed. The house was a looming 3 stories of old red brick, aged to the color of ripe watermelon. All of the leaded glass windows were framed in pale gray stone. The mansard roof was gray slate, and the entire facade was washed with indirect lighting. From the rear, I could hear the alcohol-amplified voices of numerous guests, superimposed on the harmonies of a 3-piece combo. Occasionally, a burst of laughter shot upward like a bottle rocket, exploding softly against the quiet darkness of the night in the neighborhood. I rang the bell as instructed. A maid in a black uniform opened the door and stepped back to admit me. I gave her my name and told her Mr. Ayers was expecting me. She didn't seem to care one way or the other, and the black all-purpose dress apparently suited her just fine. "Thanks." She nodded and departed, allowing me a moment to take in my surroundings. The foyer was circular, with a black marble staircase curving up from the right. The ceiling rose a full 2 stories and was capped with a cascading chandelier of gilt, the flashing prisms. One of these days, an earthquake would send the weight of it crashing, and the maid would be flattened like a cartoon coyote. Yet another man in a tuxedo appeared in due course and escorted me toward the back of the house. The floors were black and white marble squares, laid out like game board. The ceilings in the rooms were were a good 12 feet high, rimmed with plaster garlands and strange imps peering down at us. The walls in the hallway were covered in dark red silk, padded to dampen sound. I was so intent on my survey I nearly bumped into a door. The butler buttled on, ignoring me discreetly when I yelped in surprise. He ushered me into the library and pulled the double doors toward as he left the room. A large oriental rug spread a soft mauve pattern across the parquet floor. On the left, the room was anchored by a massive antique desk of mahogany and leek, inlaid with brass. The furniture, an oversized sofa with 3 solidly constructed armchairs, was upholding and upholstered in burgundy leather. The room was functional, fully used, not some tidy assemblage designed to impress. I could see file cabinets, a computer setup, a fax machine, a copier, and a 4-line telephone. Mahogany shelves on 3 walls were lined with books, one section devoted to film scripts with titles inked across the visible end. On the 4th wall, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the walled grounds in the rear, where the party was in full swing. The noise level had risen, but the brunt of it was muted by the mullioned panes. I stood at the windows and looked down at the crowd below. Sections of the immense garden had been tinted for the occasion, the red canvas glowing with candlelight. Tall propane heaters had been placed along the perimeter to warm the chilly night air. Excuse me. Tiny bulbs had been strung through all the saplings in the property. Oh my goodness. Goodness. Every branch was defined by pinpoints of illumination. Tables had been covered in red satin cloths. The centerpieces were arrangements of dark red roses and carnations. Folding chairs were swaddled in clouds of red netting. I could see the caterers were still setting up a cold midnight supper. Blood sausage, no doubt. Gross. The invitations must have specified the dress requirements. The men wore black tuxedos, and all the women wore full or cocktail-length dresses in red or black. The women were slim, and their hair was ornamental, dyed that strange California blonde affected by women over 50. Their faces seemed perfect, though by dint of surgery they all appeared to be much the same age. I suspected that none of these people were the cream of San Francisco society. These folk were the rich milk who had risen as close to the top of the bottle as money and ambition permitted in the course of one generation. My guess was that even as they drank, eyeing the buffet tables, they were trashing the host and hostess. "If you're hungry, I can have someone bring you something to eat." I turned. "I'm fine," I said automatically. In truth, I was starving, but I knew I'd feel disadvantaged grubbing down food in this man's presence. "Kinsey Milhone," I said as I held up my hand. "Thanks for seeing me tonight." "Joseph Ayers," he replied. He was probably in his late 40s, with the intense air of the gynecologist delivering embarrassing news. He wore glasses with large lenses and heavy tortoiseshell frames. He tended to keep his head down, dark eyes peering up somberly. His handshake was firm and his flesh felt as slick as if he'd just donned rubber gloves. His forehead was lined, his face elongated, an effect exaggerated by the creases beside his mouth and down the length of his cheeks. His dark hair was beginning to thin on top, but I could see that he'd been vigorously handsome once upon a time. He wore the requisite tuxedo. If he was still exhausted from long hours in the air, he showed no signs of it. He gestured me onto one of the leather chairs, and I took a seat. He sat down behind the desk and placed a finger against his lips, tapping thoughtfully while he studied me. "Actually, you might look good on camera. You have an interesting face." "No offense, Mr. Ayers, but I've seen one of your films. Faces are the least of it." He smiled slightly. "You'd be surprised. There was a time when the audience wanted big, voluptuous women. Marilyn Monroe types, almost grotesquely well endowed. Now we're looking for something a little more realistic. Not that I'm trying to talk you into anything." "This is good," I said. "I have a film school background," he said, as if pressed for an explanation. "Like George Lucas and Oliver Stone, those guys. Not that I put myself in the same league with them. I'm an academic at heart. That's the point I was trying to make." "Do they know what you do?" He cocked his head toward the window. "I've always said I was in the business, which is true, or at least it was. I sold my company a year ago to an international conglomerate. That's what I've been doing in Europe these past few weeks, tying up loose ends." "You must have been quite successful." "More so than the average Hollywood producer. My overhead was low and I never had to tolerate union bosses or studio heads. If I wanted to do a project, I did it, just like that." He snapped his fingers to illustrate. "Every film I've done has been an instant hit, which is more than most Hollywood producers can say." "What about Lorna? How'd you meet her?" "I was down in Santa Teresa Memorial Day weekend. This would have been a couple years ago. I spotted her in a hotel bar and asked if she was interested in an acting career. She laughed in my face. I gave her my card and a couple of my video cassettes. She called me some months later and expressed an interest. I set up the shoot. She flew up from San Francisco and did 2.5 days' work, for which she was paid $2,500. That's the extent of it. I'm still puzzled by the fact that the film never went into distribution. Let's just say I wasn't happy with the finished product. The film looked cheap and the camera work was lousy. The company had bought me out, ended up taking my entire library, but that one wasn't included in the deal. Did you know Lorna was working as a hooker on the side? No, but it doesn't surprise me. Do you know what they call those people? Sex workers. A sex worker might do all manner of things: massage, exotic dance, alcohol, lesbian videos, hardcore magazines. They're like migrant pickers on the circuit. They go where the work is, sometimes city to city. Not that I'm saying she'd done related work, I'm filling you in on the big picture. I watched his face, marveling at the matter-of-fact tone he was using. What about you? What is your relationship with her? I was in London when she was killed. I left on the 20th. I disregarded the non sequitur, though it interested me. When we talked on the phone, he'd been vague about how long ago her death had occurred. Maybe he'd done an internal audit in anticipation of my arrival. He opened a drawer and took out a slip of paper. I checked the payroll roster for the film she did. These are the names and addresses of a couple of crew members I've been in touch with since. I can't guarantee they are still here in San Francisco, but it's a place to start. I took the slip and glanced at it, recognizing the names from the list I'd checked. Both San Francisco numbers were now disconnects. Thanks, I appreciate this. Worthless as it is, I thought. He got up from the desk. Now, if you'll forgive me, I have to put in a quick appearance before I go to bed. Are you sure you wouldn't like a drink? Thanks, but I'd better not. I have ground to cover yet, and I'm not in town that long. I'll walk you out, he said courteously. I followed him down the wide marble stairs across the foyer and through a vast empty room with a domed ceiling and pale glossy hardwood floors. At the far end there was a small stage. What will you do now that your business is sold? This is the ballroom, he said, catching the curiosity in my look. My wife had it refurbished. She gives charity balls for diseases. Only rich people get. To answer your question, I won't have to do anything. Lucky you. Not luck. This was my intention from the onset. I'm a goal-oriented person. I'd advise you to do likewise. Absolutely, I said. In the foyer, we shook hands. I noticed he had the door closed before I reached the front walk. I retrieved my car, tipping the parking valet. See, now it's spelled B-A-L-E-T, so yeah. That was a misprint, I guess. Yeah, she gave him a buck. That was nice of her. From his look of amazement, everybody else must have tipped him 5. I'm sure. I consulted my map. Russell Turpin's Haight Street address wasn't far. I headed south on Masonic and crossed the Panhandle section of Golden Gate Park. Haight was 2 blocks up, and the address I needed was only 4 blocks down. The sidewalks were crowded with pedestrians, remnants of the past. Vintage dress shops and bookstores, funky-looking restaurants, storefront clinic. The street was well lighted, and there was still quite a bit of traffic. The street people were decked out like the flower children of old, still wearing bell-bottoms, nose rings, dreadlocks, torn blue jeans, leather, face paints, multiple earrings, backpacks, and knee-high boots. Music tumbled out of bars. In half the doorways, kids loitered, looking stoned, though perhaps on drugs more exotic than grass or ludes. I circled, driving an 8-block track, 2 down, 2 over, 2 up, 2 back, trying to find a place to tuck my car. San Francisco seems ill-equipped to accommodate the number of vehicles within the city limits. Parked cars are squeezed into every available linear inch of curb, angled into hillsides lined up on sidewalks, wedged against the buildings. Front bumpers are nosed into close to fire hydrants. Back bumpers hang out into red painted zones. Garage space is at a premium, and every driveway bristles with signs warding off poachers. By the time I found parking, it was nearly 1 a.m. I tucked my rental around the corner on Baker Street, flipping into a place as another vehicle pulled out. I fumbled in the bottom of my handbag until I found my pin light. I locked my car and hiked up the hill, the half block to Haight. All of the buildings were close packed, pastel, 4 and 5 stories tall. An occasional frail tree contributed a grace note of green. Many of the oversized windows were still lighted. From the street, I could see, in the diminishing series of acute angles, fireplace mantels, bold, abstract paintings, white walls, bookshelves, hanging plants, and crown molding. The address I had turned out to be a modern fourplex of shaggy brown shingles, sandwiched between 2 Victorian frame houses. The street light was burned out, and I was left to surmise that one was painted gold red, the other an indigo blue with perhaps white trim. In the dark, both appeared to be shades of money gray. I talked to a painter once who worked on movie sets. For a film shot in black and white, he said the crew used brown paint on 11 different shades. My current surroundings have the same feel, an environment drained of color, reduced to tones of chestnut and dun. The gradations were infinite, but visible only to night souls. Turpin apparently occupied a second-floor apartment, and I was gratified to note that the hand-lettered card tucked in the slot actually specified Russell by name, along with a housemate named Cherie Stanislaus. I peered through the glass door at a handsomely papered foyer and an apartment door on either side. At the rear, a stairway angled left and out of sight, probably doubling back on itself to an identical hallway out of sight. I moved out to the street and looked up at the second-floor windows. The front rooms on both sides of the building were lighted, which suggested that the occupants were still awake. As I moved up the stairs to the entrance, I could hear the tapping of high heels approaching from behind me. I paused, looked back. Blonde coming up the stairs wore makeup so pale, the effect was ghostly. Her eyes were elaborately done up with thick false eyelashes, 2 shades of eyeshadow, and a black pencil line on both her upper and lower lids. Her forehead was high and her hair was teased upward at the crown, held back with a gaudy rhinestone clip. The rest of her hair was long and straight, splitting at the shoulder so that half extended down her back. A cluster of long curls tumbled over her breasts. Her long dangle earrings were shaped like elongated question marks. She wore a dark leotard on top and a slinky black skirt that was split up one side. Her hips were narrow, her stomach flat. She took out a ring of keys and gave me a long, cool look as she unlocked the foyer door. Looking for someone? Russell Turpin. Well, you've come to the right place. Her smile was self-contained, not unfriendly, but less the norm, I thought. He's not here, but you can come up and wait if you want. I'm his roommate. Thanks, you're Cherie? That's right. Who are you, pray tell? Kinsey Milhone, I said. I left a message on your machine. I remember that. You're Lorna's friend, she said. We pushed the door open, and I followed her in. She paused, making sure the door had got shut again before she headed up the stairs. I trailed behind, having lied on the phone. I now had to decide whether to play this straight. Actually, Lorna, I never met. I'm a private investigator looking into her death. You knew she'd been killed. Yes, of course we did. I'm happy to hear you mention it. Russell wasn't looking forward to delivering the bad news about Lorna's death. Her stockings were black mesh, and her 3-inch stiletto heels forced her calves into high relief. When we reached the floor of the second landing, she unlocked the door to apartment C. She stepped out of her shoes with a little grimace of relief, then padded through the living room in her stocking feet. I thought she'd turn on a table lamp, but apparently she preferred the gloom. Make yourself comfortable, she said. You have any idea what time he'll be home? Any time, I'd imagine. He doesn't like staying out too late. She turned on a light in the kitchen, which was visible through bifold shutters resting on the countertop. She pushed the shutters open. Through the gap, I watched her take out 2 ice cube trays, which she cracked and emptied into an acrylic ice bucket. I'm having a drink. If you want one, speak up. I hate playing hostess, but I'm good for 1 round. I have a bottle of Chardonnay open if you're interested. You look like a white wine kind of girl. I'd love some. You need help? Don't we all? She remarked. You have offices in the city? I'm from Santa Teresa. She tilted her head, peering through the pass-through at me. Why would you come all the way up here to see Russell? He's not a suspect, I hope. Are you his girlfriend? I thought it was time I posed the questions instead of her. I wouldn't say that. We're fond of each other, but we're not exactly an item. He prefers to be thought of as a footloose and fancy-free, one of those types. She plunked several ice cubes into a tall glass and splashed scotch halfway up the side. She squirted a seltzer water using one of those devices I'd seen in old Birdie's movies. She took a sip, shuddering slightly, and then set the glass aside while she found a wine glass in the cupboard. She held it up to the light and decided it was clean enough. She rinsed and dried it. She gave the Chardonnay out of the refrigerator and filled me a glass, then put the bottle in a cooler and left it on the counter. I moved over to the pass-through and took the wine glass she handed me. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Russell's very screwed up, she said. Really? I've never met him. You can take my word for it. You want to know why? Because he's hung like a mule. I said, having seen him in action, I could attest to that. Cherie smiled. I like the it's diplomatic. Come on back to my room and we can talk while I change. If I don't get out of this girdle, I'm going to kill myself very soon. Chapter 11. Cherie's bedroom furniture consisted of a 50s suite of blonde wood with curving lines. She sat down at a dressing table with a big round mirror in the center and 2 deep drawers on either side. She turned on a dressing lamp table, leaving the rest of the room shrouded in shadows. She had twin beds with blonde wood headboards, a blonde bed table, an old 45 record player with a flat black spindle, and a black canvas and wrought iron butterfly chair covered with discarded clothing. My only choice for sitting was one of the twin beds. I elected to lean against the doorframe instead. Cherie wiggled out of her girdle and pantyhose and tossed them on the floor, then turned to study herself in the mirror. She leaned forward, checking the lines near her eyes with a critical gaze. She shook her head in disgust. Isn't aging the pits? Sometimes I think I should just shoot myself and get it over with. While I watched, she spread out a clean white towel and took out cold cream, a skin toner, cotton balls, and Q-tips, apparently in preparation for removing her makeup. I've seen dental hygienists who weren't as meticulous in assembling their instruments. Did you know Lorna? I asked. I met her. I didn't know her. What did you think of her? I was envious, of course. She was what they call a natural beauty, also effortless. It's enough to make you sick. Her eyes met mine in the mirror. You don't wear a lot of makeup, so you probably can't relate to this, but I spend hours on myself. And to what end, I ask? 15 minutes on the street and it all evaporates. My lipstick's eaten off, my eyeshadow ends up in its crease. Look at this. My eyeliner gets transferred to my upper lid. Every time I blow my nose, my foundation comes off on the tissue like paint. Lorna was just the opposite. She never had to do anything at all. She peeled off a false eyelash and placed it in a small box where it lay like a wink. She peeled off the other lash and placed it beside the first. Now it looked like 2 eyes closed in sleep. What I wouldn't have given to have skin like her, she said. Oh well, what's a poor girl to do? She put a hand to her forehead and lifted off her hair under the wig. She wore what looked like a rubber bathing cap. She dropped her voice to its natural baritone, addressing my reflection. Well, here's Russell now. Nice to meet you, he said. Like a disappearing act, Cherie vanished, leaving a slightly gawking-looking man in her place. He turned and struck a pose. Be honest, which do you prefer? I smiled. I like Cherie. So do I, he said. He turned and looked at himself again, squinting closely. Can't tell you how obnoxious it is, waking up every morning to a beard and a penis. My God. Picture that in your lacy little underpants, like a big, old, ugly worm. Scares me to death. He began to put cold cream on his face, wiping off foundation in swipes. I couldn't take my eyes off of him. The illusion had been perfect. You do this every day? Dress up in women's clothes? Most days after work, from 9 to 5, I'm Russell. Tie, sport coat, button-down collar, the whole bit. I don't wear wingtips, but the moral and spiritual equivalent. What sort of work do you do? I'm the assistant manager at the local Circuit City, selling stereo systems. Nights I can relax and do anything I want. You don't make a living from the acting? Oh, you saw the film, he said. I hardly made a dime and it never went anywhere, which I must say was a relief. Think of the irony of getting famous as Russell when I'm really Cherie at heart. I just talked to Joe Ayers at his place. He says he sold his company. Trying to turn respectable, I'd imagine. He raised his eyebrows much more. Sometimes I'm tempted to do away with it, but I can't bear to have myself surgically altered. As in doubt as I am, maybe an organ donor program would be interested, he said. He waved a hand airily, but enough of my tacky problems. What else can I tell you about Lorna? I'm not sure. I gather you really didn't know her that well? That depends on your frame of reference. We spent 2 days together while the film was being shot. We had an instant rapport and laughed our tiny asses off. She was such a kick, kinky and fearless with a wicked sense of humor. We were soul sisters, I mean that. I was heartbroken when I heard that she had died of all things. That was the only time you saw her during the filming? No, I ran into her maybe 2 months later. Up her shopping with that piggy-looking sister. Which one? She has 2. Oh, really? I can't remember the name. Something odd as I recall. She looked like an imitation Lorna. Same face, but all porked out. Anyway, I saw them on the street, down around Union Square, and we stopped to chat about nothing in particular. She looked spectacular as ever. That's the last I saw of her. What about the other actress, Nancy Dobbs? Was she a friend of Lorna's? Oh God, wasn't she the worst? Talk about wooden. She was pretty bad, I admitted. Has she done other films for Ayers? I doubt it. In fact, I'm sure not. I think she just did that one as a lark. Someone else had been hired and opted out at the last minute. Lorna had her peg. Nancy was terribly ambitious, without the talent or body to get very far. She's one of those women who try to screw her way up to the top. Only no one would have her, so how far could she get? What a dog. Russell laughed. Actually, she'd have screwed a dog if she thought it would help. How'd she get along with Lorna? As far as I know, they never had any kind of snit, but privately each felt infinitely superior to the other. I know because they both took confiding in me between takes. Is she still in the city? I'd like to talk to her. Russell looked at me with surprise. You didn't see her tonight? I thought you must have talked to her at Ayers' little soiree. What would she be doing there? She's married to him, that's the point, isn't it? All during the shoot, she really flung herself at him. Next thing we heard, voila. She was Mrs. Joseph Ayers' noted socialite. It's probably why he dumped the porno flick. Imagine that getting out. He calls her Duchess, by the way. Isn't that pretentious? Was there ever a suggestion that Joe Ayers' relationship with Lorna was other than professional? He was never involved with her sexually, if that's what you mean. It's really a bit of a cliche to imagine these guys are all sampling the merchandise. Believe me, his only interest was in making a buck. Lorna's mother seems to think her death was related to the film somehow. Possible, I suppose, but why would anybody kill her for that? She might have been a star if she'd lived. As for those of us who worked on it, trust me, we got along. We were all so grateful for the opportunity. We made a point of it, he said. How in the world did her mother find out? Somebody sent her the tape. Russell stared at my reflection in the mirror. As an expression of condolences, that's in poor taste, he said. You'd have to wonder at the motive. Ain't that the truth? I went back to the motel feeling wide awake. By 2 a.m, Santa Teresa has shut down. In San Francisco, all the bars had closed, but numerous businesses were still open. Gas stations, bookstores, fitness gyms, video rentals, coffee shops, even clothing stores. I changed out of my flats and the all-purpose dress, stripping off my pantyhose, and with the same relief Cherie had expressed. Once in my jeans and turtleneck, I felt like I was back in my own skin again. I found an all-night diner 2 doors away with the Del Rey and ate a lavish breakfast. I returned to my room and put the chain on the rack. I plunked off my Reeboks, propped all the pillows at my back, and checked Lorna's file again, leafing through the crime scene sketches and the accompanying pictures. The photographer had shot the outside of the house, the front yard and back, with views looking north, south, east, and west. There were shots of both the front and back porches, wood railing windows. The front door had been closed but unlocked, with no signs of forced entry. Within the cabin itself, there was no weapon visible and no evidence of a struggle. I could see colored smudges where the fingerprint technicians had been at work with their various powders. According to the report, elimination fingerprints and palm prints had been taken, and most latents on the premises had been accounted for. Many were Lorna's, some were from family members, the landlord, her friend and Neil, a couple of acquaintances, had been interviewed by homicide investigators. Many surfaces had been wiped clean. The photographs of Lorna began in long shot, establishing her position relative to the front door. There were intermediate range photos, close-ups, with a 6-inch ruler in evidence to indicate scale. The log showed an orderly progression through the area. I was frustrated by the flat, 2-dimensional images. I wanted to crawl into the frame, examine all the items on the tabletops, open up the drawers, and pick through the contents. I found myself squinting, moving pictures closer to my face and then back again, as if the subject matter might suddenly leap into sharper focus. I would stare at the body, scanning the background, taking in items through my peripheral vision. The cabin, when I'd seen it, had been stripped of all the furniture. Only the bare bones of Lorna's living space were left intact. Empty cabinets and bathroom, plumbing and electrical fixtures. It was good to see the pictures to correct my mental process. In memory, I had already begun to distort the room sizes and relative distances. I went through all the pictures, a second time and then a third. In the 10 months since Lorna's death, the crime scene had been dismantled, and this was all that remained. If murder were ever proved and a suspect charged, the entire case easily rests on the contents of this envelope. And what were the chances? What could I possibly hope to accomplish this late in the game? Basically, in my investigation, I was mimicking the spiral method of a crime scene search. Starting at the center, moving outward and around in ever-widening circles. The problem was that I had no direction and no hard line to take. I didn't even have a theory about why she had died. I felt as though I were fishing, fly casting in the hopes that I'd somehow snag myself a killer. All that wily devil had to do was lie low, looking up at my lure from the bottom of its coat. I sorted through the file while I let my mind wander. Aside from the random or the serial killer, the perpetrator of the homicide has to have a reason, some concrete motive for wanting the victim dead. In the case of Lorna Kepler, I was still uncertain what the reason was. Financial gain was a possibility. She'd had assets in her estate. I made a note to myself to check with Janice on that score, giving the assumption that Lorna had no living issue. Janice and Mays would be her legal heirs if she died. It was hard to picture either one of them guilty of murder. For one thing, if it were Janice, she'd have to be a fool to turn around and bring me into it. Mace was a question mark. He certainly hadn't conformed to my notion of a grieving parent. Her sisters were another possibility, though neither struck me as sufficiently smart or sufficiently energetic. I picked up the phone and dialed Frankie's coffee shop. This time, Janice answered. I could hear jukebox music in the background, but not much else. Hi, Janice. This is Kinsey up in San Francisco. Well, Kinsey, how are you? I'm always surprised to hear from you at such an hour. Did you find the fellow she was working for? I talked to him this evening, and I also tracked down one to be a female. I'm still in shock. It was unbelievable, given my perception. I was forever slipping her 20 just to make sure she'd eat right. And there she was with all those stocks and bonds and savings accounts. She must have had 6. You'd think that kind of money she'd have lived a better life. I wanted to tell her the money was part of Lorna's pension fund, but it seemed unkind somehow since she hadn't lived long enough to use it. Did she have a will? Well, yes, just one sheet of paper that she'd written out herself. She left everything to Mace and me. I'd like to see that if you don't object. You can see anything you want. When I get home from work, I'll find the box of Lorna's personal effects and leave it on Berlin's desk. You can stop by when you get back and pick it up from her. Well, I'd appreciate that. I want to talk to the two of them in any event. Oh, shoot, that reminds me. Have you talked to that woman Lorna, who used to house sit for her? Once. Well, I wonder if you'd do me a favor. Last time I went through Lorna's things, I came across a set of house keys. I'm sure belonged to her. I've been trying to return them and haven't had a minute to take care of it. You want me to drop them off? If you would. I feel like I should do it myself, but I just don't have time. And I'd appreciate it if you'd make sure I get everything back when you finish going through it. There's some divided in interest statements I'm going to need to pass along to the probate attorney when he files her income taxes. Has the estate been settled yet? It's still in the works. What I'm giving you is copies, but still like to have them back. No problem. I could probably drop it all off to you day after tomorrow. That'd be fine. I could hear the swell chatter in the background. She said, "Oh, I gotta go." See you tomorrow, I said, and hung up. I looked around at the room, which was serviceable but glum. The mattress was as dense as mud, while the pillows were foam rubber and threatened serious neck damage. I'd made reservations for a noon flight out of San Francisco. It was now almost 3 a.m. I wasn't ready to sleep. If I junked my return ticket, I could drive the rental car back and drop it at the airport in Santa Teresa, where my VW was sitting in the long-term parking. The trip would take roughly 6 hours, and if I could manage to avoid dozing off at the wheel, I'd be back around 9. I suddenly found myself energized by the notion of heading home. I swung my feet over the side of the bed, found my Reeboks, pulled them on, and left the laces dangling. I went into the bathroom, gathered up my toiletries, and shoved everything in the duffel. It took me longer to wake the night manager than it took me to check out. By 3:22, I was heading south on the 101. There's nothing as hypnotic as a highway at night. Visual stimulation is reduced to the lines on the road. Asphalt zipping past in a series of streets. Any shrubbery at the side of the road is diminished to a blur. All the trailer trucks were in transit, semis carrying goods that ranged from new cars to furniture, from flammable liquids to flattened cardboard boxes. Off to the side I caught sight of townlet after townlet, encased in darkness, illuminated only by rows of street lamps. An occasional billboard provided visual distraction. At long intervals, a truck stop appeared like an island of light. I had to stop twice for coffee. Having opted to head back, I now found the drive narcotic and was struggling to stay awake. The radio in the rental car was good company. I flipped from station to station, listening to a talk show host, classical, and country music. The countless newscasts. Once upon a time, I'd smoke cigarettes, and I could still remember the habits as a way of marking time on car trips. Now through her files. Music break.
Hatred kills your heart's desire, and reality starts looking like a dumpster fire. You start bitching to me, but you're preaching to the choir. You don't need to be so mad, 'cause sometimes we hurt, sometimes we cry, sometimes we're sure there's no reason to try. When the whole world goes completely insane, open your heart, stand up and sing. I'm gonna finger bang my day. Yeah, yeah, I'll finger bang my day. That's right. You gotta make the choice to give it all you've got, and make your day moan with pleasure, really make it hot. Because your day deserves a lover that pulls out the stops. Come on, it's not so hard. 'Cause sometimes we hurt, sometimes we cry, sometimes we're sure there's no reason to try. When the whole world blows up in our face, what else could we do but stand up and sing? I'm gonna finger bang my day. Yeah, yeah, finger bang my day.
really doing? We can't live in a world that has this much hate. We have to get honest with ourselves. We have to take stock in what our part is in all of this madness. We have to let go, and we focus on giving love, setting that intention. And each and every single one of us gets up every day with the intention to give love. And we do it. We go out there and we give love every single day.